so everybody, welcome. I think my power might have just gone out. Okay, we're good so far. We're good right now. Alright, so if everyone would like to welcome themselves, starting with Dan and going down.
Hello, I'm Dan the Man. I'm an economic conservative and a libertarian.
Alright, Fishy?
It was pretty loud.
We're welcoming or introducing ourselves, so.
Oh, okay. I am the Almighty Dode.
Otherwise known as
I don't really swing any definite direction when it comes to government shit.
I think Fishy's mic is broken.
I guess I'm more of a rightist than a leftist for government. If I had to pick, honestly.
I guess that leaves us with Trashy. I don't know if Fishy's mic is
Yep, Trashy. The centrist boy. My name pretty much gives it away.
Well, you're not the centrist boy near, but you're Trashy.
I should have just
Definitely
changed it. Whatever. It'll pop up soon.
What is your opinion on this topic? This topic at hand? Alex Jones being the topic.
Can't say over the.
Alright. But I do think it's a violation of just like the ability for free speech. Like where does
See, that's a tricky slope when you talk about the internet, though.
Here's the thing.
Banning stop is my question.
Well, yeah, so that's the whole issue. So my 2 cents on the issue is tech, which means that now, if the government really wanted to, they could categorize them as not being an actual platform and actually say, hey, you have to regulate what goes on this, if they're going to take a stance like this.
Well, my thing is even Spotify banned him, like 5 companies at once, including Apple banned him, like all in one day, which I think is just remnant of like 1984, 1984 kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because the thing is, they all claim to be platforms, and they claim to be a representative of the people and like what everybody has to say on the internet. And now they're trying to actually regulate what goes on it, which means they should be subject to more government regulation.
Yes, but I believe the reason why they believe they're right for doing that is because they set up rules in the first place for most of those places.
Well, here's
and
the
they
thing.
can actually kick you if you break those rules.
Well, here's the thing. They claim that Alex Jones was breaking the guidelines, but they've had him doing the same exact stuff on all of those sites for years now. So the idea that you could just suddenly say out of nowhere, hey, you're breaking the rules, if they've been breaking the rules, they've been breaking them for about 3 or 4 years now. I mean, this is obviously a constructed attack on free speech.
I honestly think they didn't honestly care about him until now.
Oh, they definitely cared about him. Alex Jones has been a huge thing in the news for quite a long time.
No, I'm talking about the companies.
Oh.
The companies only care usually about profits or getting more people on them.
Well, that's not exactly it.
These companies are controlled by mostly just the left and things like that.
Yeah, a lot of companies are controlled by the political left. Now, there are some companies that are out for profit motives, but they've also figured out that their profits will increase if they pander to millennials, which 73% of all millennials are liberal. So, I mean, their profits are going to go up. And it's often been shown that liberals will boycott businesses that they do not believe are politically on their side.
I just think it's a slippery slope if you want to talk about censorship on the internet.
Of course. I mean, they technically have a right to do it, but not under what the government currently characterizes them, which they characterize them as a neutral platform, and that's not what they're fulfilling at the moment.
It's obviously not what they're being if they're willing to ban anyone. Like, I think everyone deserves the right to speak, whether how dumb they are. You know what? You also want to know super secret fact that nobody knows. You also have the right not to listen to them. Whoa! You have the right not to listen to them. So.
Yeah, you also have the right not to use their website if you don't listen to them, apparently.
But I mean, like, it's very obvious that the businesses kind of have a two-faced thing going on. And I'm just going to make a reference back to, if you guys remember the Zuckerberg congressional hearing a couple months back, where Mark Zuckerberg was on in the congressional hearing, and they asked him if Facebook needed to be regulated, and he openly said yes. And the thing was, does Facebook actually want to be regulated? Hell no. They're gonna they'll be cutting their profits in half if they do. But if they say they do, their profits will go up because they're pandering to the left. I mean, if you look at Facebook traffic for conservative news outlets and liberal news outlets, you can see that Facebook is highlighting certain sources and getting rid of others.
Oh, you know what the greatest thing about Twitter is too?
Yeah.
Whenever you search up Alex Jones stuff on Twitter, it's only people being happy about him banned. If you leave on the quality feature,
Yeah.
it's so bad.
Do you guys remember what Google did for Hillary during the 2016 election cycle?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, where if you typed up Hillary Clinton, it would be like a story about her opening up a new school instead of her email scandal. Oh my gosh, that was so funny.
Well, of course. Why wouldn't they do that? Supports their agenda. Supports their business.
It's very obvious. Google's probably the most obvious example of being to the left. If you look at kind of some of the stuff that goes on in Google, their guideline changes, the adpocalypse on YouTube, all that kind of stuff, it's very obvious that Google has become so big as a company that they're not really looking at profit that much anymore. They have stockholders to keep happy, but their profit's going to keep going up exponentially. And I think that if Google continues to pander to the left and take things down, you might actually see a real competitor in terms of search engines.
Yeah, maybe.
Because, I mean, a lot of people look at Google and they see Google as an invincible machine, but they forget that Google was really only started up in the 2000s, and a lot of the companies that are very prevalent today haven't been around for very long. Trashy, what's your opinion on it?
I don't really know enough about it to really have an opinion.
What's your opinion?
I mean, I do know that
In general, too.
it's shitty in general. Like, I get it. He's a
just
little
wanna make
crazy.
sure I just want to make sure I'm not monopolizing the conversation or anything like that.
You're fine.
I get that he's a little crazy, or whatever.
Yeah, people
But
also
still.
have to listen to him.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Like,
why
they don't
would you
have to
like-
listen to him. Only the people that want to listen to him have to listen to him. There's no reason to ban him over that.
I hate people trying to deplatform people just because they have a different thought process. When it's like,
Oh yeah, and then don't get me wrong, Alex Jones is a crazy scumbag. The kind of guy who says that kids in Sandy Hook were child actors. Like that kind of stuff, that's crazy. I mean, just the kind of things that he says, like if you guys remember when we launched missiles into Syria, Alex Jones actually went on live and he was crying. He was bawling his eyes out because he was apparently getting a divorce with Trump. It's like the kind of stuff that he says on his show are kind of off-putting.
oh yeah,
But at the same time, he should be allowed to say whatever he wants.
crazy.
It's like you know those people who are like awful racist on the internet. We can shun them and all that, but that's no reason to take away their right to free speech. We can shun them, make fun of them, do whatever, but don't take away their right to free speech.
Google has such an influence that there's really even a Chinese version of it. I mean, like the Google owns Google Chat.
Oh, geez, yeah. I mean, I can't really stand Google too much anymore.
Yeah, and Google Chat is regulated by the Chinese government and all that. But, yeah.
And I think that we could pivot into a larger conversation about, if you guys remember, it's not really relevant very much anymore, but do you guys remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal from a while ago?
The what?
The Cambridge Analytica scandal
Yeah,
for the 2016 election?
yeah,
What's you guys' opinion on that?
what? Yeah, it's fine. Sorry, yeah, that was a big mess there.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's kind of ridiculous and hypocritical that the left calls out something as simple as Cambridge Analytica when what they were doing was not illegal or unprecedented. In fact, in 2012, Obama actually had better data gathering sites that he used to easily win the election and figure out its demographics.
They are selling personal information still, but not really for that data. So it's not like they're ruining people's lives with it.
Like, for example, one of the biggest demographics in the voting population today that continues to rise is middle-class white women. And if you, as you could see in the early 2000s, Bush won both of his elections off pandering to, I believe the actual name given to it was the soccer moms. You know, kind of like suburban white women. And the thing is, that demographic is only growing and growing, and they have one of the highest voting percentages in the entire country based off their demographic. And Obama actually pandered to them as well, and that's why he so easily won the elections.
Well, yeah. But I mean, we're all very political people here, obviously. But
yeah, I think the issue with this is that we really just can't find anything to argue about.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's not really.
It's supposed to be a debate group, yet we're not really debating.
But
We're just ranting.
Yeah, but
I
think one thing where I would disagree with you on the Cambridge Analytica, because I don't think Facebook should have sold that information in the first place, regardless to anybody. I mean, that's my personal opinion on that.
Well, the thing is, what Facebook kind of did there, and Facebook didn't really do anything. They just allowed other companies to do it. So what Cambridge Analytica would do is they would put up games all over Facebook. They would put up ads for games, and these games would figure out what your political views were, and then it would say, would you like to share this with your Facebook friends, or would you like to share this with Facebook? And if you said yes, it was now what your political views were and what demographic you were, and that was shared to the public. And all these companies would do is gather that information and then use it. And the whole point was that you had to agree with it. They weren't taking people's political views and all their information without anybody knowing. That's kind of what Facebook does for ads, but it's not what Cambridge Analytica did.
Yeah.
You had to actually agree for them to take your information.
Yeah, but one could argue that they didn't know what it was going to be used for.
Yeah, and Pokemon Go is probably the world's biggest spy tool. It's pretty great. if you
Well, I mean,
yeah.
when you think about that in context, it's really kind of like a lawyer or a business owner kind of tricking you out of a contract. I mean, that they put the contract right there, and they said, "Hey, we can use this for stuff if you just want to agree with it." But I think the issue is people on the internet are so ignorant, they will just say yes to contracts, assuming that there's nothing bad in them. So I think people really just need to make more clear and easy to read contracts, and I think that would clear up a lot of this stuff.
Well, yeah, but companies don't want to do that because they want people to blindly accept it.
I mean, yes, that is the whole point.
If they didn't do that, then nobody would blindly accept it.
I saw a really interesting statistic the other day. We take the internet for granted because it's free, right? But almost all of our information is gathered by every single site we go on for ads. But I actually figured out the amount of money that it costs to purchase each of our personal information is so low. Each of our entire personal lives is worth only $11 to Google. So you could just pay $11 and have yourselves completely privatized. You could not have any of your information given up, because that's how much they would typically pay for it.
Well, that's not that much.
No, it's pretty crazy how low it is. I mean, I'm telling you, I would totally pay $11 to keep my information safe.
It's like $3 of Twinkies.
Oh, and you want to know something else? Just a warning to anybody watching this out there. Google actually uses the microphone on your phone to listen into your conversations and do it for ads. I saw this one guy tested. He started talking about how much he wanted a yacht, and he would talk about it in the microphone constantly. He would just say the word yacht, and he said it for 3 days straight. And then he opened up his phone, and the first ad he got was for a yacht. And I mean, to show you that it's not like you don't just get random ads for yachts, do you? I mean,
No,
and then he kept doing. He got like four different ads for yachts in about 20 minutes. So I mean, if you can, make sure you go on the Google app and turn off the microphone, because they are actually listening in on your conversation for different buzzwords.
a troll. Somebody in the chat spamming. It's fine.
Where?
No, in the stream chat, it's fine though. It just makes it a better meme.
Oh. So anybody else want to make a comment on these?
Yeah, I do find what you said there interesting with the microphone thing.
Yeah, it's actually quite serious.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of what companies are doing now is just pandering to the left because it makes them better money than.
Does make the better money, and I think there's also another thing where a lot of people are actually, they act conservative, but they think liberally. Like, for example, if you look at did you guys watch A Quiet Place recently?
Mm-hmm.
Have any of you guys seen A Quiet Place? I think
I have. Well, I haven't seen it, but I've seen enough like clips of it to know what goes on.
You have John Krasinski, who is one of the most liberal actors in existence, playing a movie that's really conservative. It's incredibly pro-life. It's got gender roles. I mean, and they completely played in that movie, and they're completely okay with the ultra-conservative message that came out of it. So I think that
ultra-conservative, it's pretty standard.
But I mean, overall, I think that some of the way that people think, there's kind of like an elitist attitude that goes on in that, to where you may act conservatively personally, and you want to have your own personal challenges, but once you become successful, you don't believe that other people have the ability to become as successful as you have.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Sorry, excuse me.
Bless you.
No, but that was one of the greatest movies and one of the greatest memes that the left did on themselves. It was pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the better movies to come out lately. I haven't seen too many movies lately, and that's one of the few ones I have.
I watched it, but the only bad thing about that movie was that the people that I watched it with wouldn't shut.
Oh, I see.
It breaks the suspense a little bit when there's people talking.
Wow, that sucks.
Yeah, it was fine though. It was still a good movie.
Man, this is actually decently irritating, this game.
No, but I mean, it's pretty nice when they accidentally calm themselves. It's hilarious. Especially Hollywood, especially Hollywood in general. They I don't know how many movies they've gone against their own ideology in. Even back in the day when they were more conservative, they made like extremely liberal movies sometimes on complete accident. You know?
Curtis, you sound really low, by the way.
I just turned his volume all the way up.
I did too.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. It's just funny when Hollywood does it.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. 100%.
Yeah, they do that a lot too, which is the funny part.
So, anything else anybody want to say so far?
Trash, you got anything to say? Braun, what about you?
Not really, not at the moment.
Well, I think we could add an extra topic to this if you guys want.
I'd be up for adding an extra topic. I think there are things where we could be much more passionate about.
Well, what do you think? What do you think something interesting would be that we?
Would you prefer domestic or foreign policy?
Foreign. Actually, no. I could go for either.
I think domestic.
Oh my god.
I think domestic policy would probably be a little more decisive with us because I'm libertarian and you guys are more conservative.
Fucking cunt.
I mean, I'm a conservative libertarian, but I mean, if you're a libertarian, are you interventionist or are you?
I think there should be a heavy focus on defensive military budget, but not intervening in other countries.
Oh, so you're not an interventionist; you're an isolationist.
I disagree. I believe in intervening.
I do think we should should defend other allies. Like I'm not saying like we should abandon Europe in general, but we should.
I don't think that's what you're saying. But like, for example, do you think that we should have toppled Gaddafi's regime in 2014?
In 2014,
well, I mean, so there. I agree with you there. Like, basically, I'm gonna.
that was not our concern, and now there's
No, Gaddafi's regime definitely wasn't our return, especially after he cooperated with us. Right before we invaded Iraq, about 2 weeks before, we lined up troops on the Libyan border and said, give up your weapons of mass destruction or we will topple your regime. Gaddafi complied. He gave us 6 nuclear bombs, and then we sent our army to Iraq instead. And I mean, what did Gaddafi get for complying with us? He got Western-backed rebels overthrowing his regime and beheading him in public.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to be honest, recently, actually, we were talking to Kim Jong-un and we said, hey, we could use the Gaddafi model to denuclearize North Korea. And that made Kim very mad because he saw what happened to Gaddafi and he said, I don't want any of that. But, I mean, what do you think about the war in Iraq?
I think we could have gone about it better. I think we should have supported the locals more than we did. If we're gonna go to war, at least spend time on fixing the infrastructure of the country and powering up a new government and military.
So you do believe we should have gone into Iraq?
I not gone into Iraq. Just if we were to go into Iraq, just stay there and help the people out a little bit more. Or like,
I think we could both agree on that. The pullout of Iraq was messy and a disaster.
Yeah, I blame Obama for ruining, or like just spawning ISIS.
By 2008, crime had dropped. Basically, from 2004 to 2008, crime dropped in Iraq by over 8 times. Traffic stop violations were almost nothing at all. The troops could have actually begun to pull out slowly and slowly if we had just kept enough in there to prop up the regime, you know?
Not even the regime, just a democratic government there.
Yeah, and I think the issue was because we pulled out while Obama was lifting sanctions on Iran had plenty of money to buy out all kinds of allies all over the place. They basically bought the entire Iraqi government and now have a ton of influence in there. Iraq is basically a puppet state for Iran. You've seen that recently with Iran moving in missile silos and troops onto the Israeli border with Iraq.
There's a big Hezbollah province, Hezbollah, what's it called? Or Hezbollah, I'm sorry.
Hezbollah, yeah.
The big funding for them from Iran. And they
Yep, that as well.
They control, I think, Lebanon. Yeah.
Yep, they have a puppet state in Iraq and Lebanon at the moment. And I mean, I don't know how much stupider Obama could have gotten with that policy because Iran is the only country on the entire planet where it's the single goal of that nation is the destruction of another state, and that other state is Israel, which is our greatest ally in the Middle East.
I don't know about the only state that has that goal. I'm pretty sure China's goal is to.
Well, I mean, China wants to subjugate Taiwan, but they don't want to mass murder and kill off all of the Taiwanese people. Yeah. They just want to integrate them into China, and that's not one of China's stated goals either, because China wants to pretend like they're all peaceful now. Iran is the only country that openly states that it wants the complete destruction of another state, nation, and people.
Mm-hmm.
And you could obviously see that in their policies as well.
Well, the Muslims have a long history of working with, or a long history of anti-Zionist and anti-Israeli policy and anti-Jewish policy in general. Going back to the Middle Ages, that's why Hitler has commissioned a Muslim SS division.
So justification for Iraq? Do you think we should have gone in?
To an extent, but I think Afghanistan should have been more of the focus.
You would rather...
We sent way less troops into the country that was infested with terrorists than the actual...
So you... I mean, well, Afghanistan is the only circumstance where any country has ever activated Article 5 of NATO. So we basically sent in a 120,000 NATO-backed coalition into Afghanistan to topple the regime. But I think the main issue where we went wrong there was that we pulled almost all of them out almost immediately.
Well, yeah.
And that we did not anticipate that the Taliban would never be willing to negotiate.
Oh yeah, well the Taliban also came back and occupied a good half of the country again. So
even today,
so the Taliban is still fighting strong in Afghanistan and almost controls half the especially the rural land.
Well, Afghanistan controls a sizable amount of the country. Officials have estimated that Afghanistan controls about 23% of the territory. But an even more startling thing is that the Afghanistani government, the actual government that we back, only has full control over 40% of the nation. They only have full control. So they have partial control in a lot of other areas, but there's still a lot open to terrorist attacks, which you've seen recently against United States troops, Austria-backed NATO troops, and as well as Afghani troops in the capital.
Yeah. I think we should have should have left the troops there and plunged. And I don't even care if we plunge that nation into chaos for a year just to cleanse all of the terror scum out of it. But we should have at least tried to remove the threat.
Oh, 100%. I think that
and support the government. Like there's always going to be fallback out of invasions. There's always going to be some rebels that are against you. You just need to prop up the government that you want to support
and say, hey, we're never going away until this is over.
Yeah, and then show the people that you're with them. And show the people
It worked perfectly with Japan. When we created a puppet state in Japan where MacArthur was in charge, for the first 11 years, there were Japanese rebels all over the place trying to fight to restore the emperor as the supreme ruler of Japan. But after a while, they realized that it just wasn't going to happen. There were so many United States troops occupying the nation.
They let Hirohito stay as a ceremonial.
Yes, but they wanted him to have absolute power once again. That was their whole point, was that Japan was now...
We rewrote their constitution where it would be both traditional Japanese and kind of this new Japanese.
Completely. But the Japanese people were still not very happy about it. And while the majority of them accepted it, there were many who did not.
Yeah, well, we didn't try to throw out their culture or anything like that. And trust me, the amount of war crimes committed in Iraq and Afghanistan are tremendous. by the Taliban especially, but occasionally by NATO also. I mean, there's a few incidents of it which a few is too much.
There are definitely a few incidents, but I mean, one of the issues...
Although it's not nearly as bad as the atrocity of which Vietnam was.
Or even worse, I mean, Saddam Hussein's regime during peacetime alone was pretty horrible.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the Shiite minority, where... When Bush Sr.
You mean the majority? The Shiite majority was suppressed under the Sunni minority under Saddam.
Oh, I didn't know the Shiites were a majority.
Yeah, they're majority in
Iraq.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't actually know that. I thought Iran was the only Shiite majority country.
Iran and Iraq. Yeah.
Dang, I actually had no idea that was a thing.
They're not a deadly. They're not like a full majority. So the Sunnis still have. They have a lot more.
Yeah.
They have about 40% of the population and a lot more influence because of the fact that they were.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the big
supported by
mistakes.
Saudi Arabia in that oil.
One of the big mistakes that I think we made was in Operation Desert Storm when we decided not to go after Baghdad. One of the things that we did while we were reinvading Kuwait and liberating it was we incited the Shiite majority in Iraq to basically rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein. And they actually did rise up, and much of northern Iraq was under their control. But then when we decided not to pursue Baghdad, Saddam came back, and he basically oppressed them, killed almost every single one of them and their families, and resubjugated them. So in 2003, when we called on the Shiites once again to rise up and attack Saddam, and then to establish a government, many of the Shiites did not answer the call because they were either dead or demoralized, thinking that the United States wasn't actually going to help them. And as a result, lots of the Shiites actually ended up turning against the United States by 2005 because they just had lost their faith in it after Operation Desert Storm.
Yeah, well, a lot of the children of those people joined Hezbollah also, and they're still in it.
Oh yeah, that kind of stuff is pretty awful.
And the Hezbollah are definitely not good when it comes to the human rights record. Especially
100%.
Especially lately in like Lebanon or they're not as bad as in Lebanon because Lebanon has a big Christian. It has a really big Christian community.
Minority. I think it's like 40% or something. Christian.
And then the rest is like traditional or just Muslim and I think some traditional way. But you see also there's quite a bit of Sunnis and both Sunnis and Shias. I mean it's mostly
I see.
There's a three-way, kind of almost a three-way split with the
against Christians per capita of almost any other country on the planet. I think the only country that has a higher crimes against Christians per capita would be I was going to say Egypt, but I pacified Iraq, but the way that we treated it and the way that we declared war was wrong. I think we should have declared war in Iraq under the guise of they were committing horrible war crimes and oppressing their people, and that we could come in and establish a democratic and free regime instead of just saying they have weapons.
I think we should have propped up the proper regime and not just left it to the people. Like I get that the people are gonna try to fight for their best interests, but we've seen that sometimes they need support. Like in Iran, a bunch of students now are mostly regretting their decisions. Decided to prop up the Ayatollah Khamenei.
Oh, 100%. Well, the thing is, I think that we need an American guided but still democratic. We don't collapse. We make sure radicals don't take over. But besides that, we give the people complete freedom. And that system was going on almost perfectly in Iraq for a very long time until Obama began to pull out in 2009. Then the regime had no...
It's not
I'm sorry?
well in Afghanistan, right? I mean, it's working okay in Afghanistan, but they're still threatened by the Taliban.
Well, the main reason why they're still threatened by the Taliban is because we began to pull out. Luckily, President Trump is putting troops back in, and Congress is approving even more troops coming in every month. But at the moment, our big mistake in Iraq was that we began to send troops out. And once people no longer see the United States there, because in reality, Iraq never really thought that they were under control of their own independent government. There were United States troops everywhere, and even the Iraqi police forces were supposed to be fighting on the front lines, but never really did. But once the United States troops started leaving, there was no security for the regime anymore. They could easily have a coup d'etat and just be put out of power almost instantaneously.
Also, Turkey's quite a hilarious nation when it comes to stability, because the way their country's stability works is kind of this odd balance of coups and violent rallying for government forces.
In my opinion, I think that Turkey, the United States alliance with Turkey, I think is one of the major moral wrongs that I think we've done. I honestly, if it was not for Turkey's geopolitical positioning and the fact that they have the 8th best military on the planet, we probably would not be allying with them, and that's because they're a horrible regime that oppresses its people. That is very true. I mean, a lot of militaries, I mean, they're the biggest, but I wouldn't say they're better than a couple other different countries' militaries.
Yeah, well, they have a conscription policy, so.
They do, and that in Turkey, I'm a big person when it comes to against conscription policies. I don't think that conscription policies should be put in place unless there are foreign troops occupying a nation's soil and depriving its citizens of their rights to life, liberty, and property.
Or a large threat to the world democracy, like Hitler.
Like, for example, I'm very against the draft in Vietnam because there were not Vietnamese troops on American soil threatening our citizens.
Well, there weren't Nazi troops on American soil in World War II.
Well, we were attacked. There were American citizens who died in Pearl Harbor that initiated the war.
Yeah, but those weren't Nazis that attacked Pearl Harbor.
No, they weren't Nazis, but the Japanese... The Nazis declared war on us to show their alliance with Japan. The nation that attacked us and killed American citizens declared war on us because they were allying with the Nazis. So we had to take out the Nazis as well. Like, for example, I do not believe in the draft in Vietnam. I don't believe in the draft in Korea. I do believe in the draft in the Civil War and World War II. And those are two of the exclusive times where I think it was probably necessary. But besides that, I'm pretty much against the draft overall.
Oh, what about 1812?
The War of 1812, I think the draft was... I actually kind of forgot about it, but I do think the draft was justified in the War of 1812. Although, I would say it's kind of questionable, right? Because the thing was, that was an offensive war that we took out, but the offensive war also had justification because one of the main reasons we were attacked was Britain was kidnapping American citizens and forcing them into the Navy. So honestly, I think that the 1812 war could definitely be a justification for the draft.
Honestly, I think we should be intervening more.
I think we should get revenge on Canada for 18. No, I'm just kidding.
I am an ultra interventionist, basically.
I think because we're as strong as we are, and we're like one of the biggest democratic countries, we should help protect other countries or help countries become democratic that want to be.
I gotta correct you there. We're not democratic.
We are a constitutional republic.
Yes, we're Armenian.
Technically still democratic.
Democracy is tyrannical.
We can be considered
We are a representative democracy.
No, we are a constitutional republic.
Representative democracy.
No, democracy is, honestly, in my opinion, democracy is tyrannical because
really,
and that's one of the things that the left would have you believe is that democracy is all great, but just because 51% of the population votes to rape and pillage the other 49% doesn't make it right.
Ben
I think that democracy is
we are a democratic republic.
We are a constitutional republic. We concede certain rights due to a constitution. But my basic 2 cents on the terms of interventionism, I think that we should be intervening everywhere we possibly can. I don't think we should shy away from intervention as long as it's not with a world power. I think that when it comes to intervention with China and Russia, we should be willing to put up a strong fight and say, hey, if this happens, we're declaring war on you almost instantly. But I don't think that we should directly try to get into a fight with them. Mainly because we have to kind of assess the risk of, if we declare an offensive war, is there a chance that these nations could turn it around and put troops on our soil and oppress our citizens? And if the answer is yes, then we probably shouldn't intervene. But
okay, that option is not a realistic scenario.
Is it? I mean, if China and Russia both declared war on us and NATO did not back it up, because we were actually getting into an offensive conflict.
Okay, first off, everyone knows that if America went to war with Russia and China, chances are the other major NATO countries would end up joining.
There might be certain other major NATO countries that would join, but I think a lot of the countries in Europe have kind of become pacifist. I think that we would get a good amount of help, but in all honesty, if we were the ones declaring the war, we might not get as much support as we would like.
Brent says everyone who's watching this stream is leaving. He says you guys need to be louder.
Oh, are we not loud enough? All right.
He says it's too quiet.
But I mean, when it comes to taking down authoritarian regimes, I think one of the most important, a country like Myanmar should never exist. A country that has slaughtered 300,000 Rohingya Muslims in the last 2 years and is openly denying UN rights councils and UN inspectors to the country should not be able to exist. This is an authoritarian regime.
Yes, but that's where you have to. That's where it gets tricky because of national sovereignty.
Well, But here's the thing: once you start committing horrible, horrible violations and genocide, you lose the right to national sovereignty. We should be able to go in there.
National sovereignty is always a thing. That's a country is literally has that one.
Should be recognized. I'm sorry.
Until they create a large enough issue to where it can be voted on by the UN Security Council as a like issue worth investing their time and punishing.
Curtis, I can barely hear you. Can you speak up?
Well, here's the thing. My opinion on this is that national sovereignty is overall a subjective term. A state only exists if people believe a state exists. So really all that has to happen to turn national sovereignty around is if most of the major countries on this planet no longer recognize it.
Yeah, but see, that's the problem.
Can I finish my point, please? If we see horrible, immoral things taking place on this planet, we should no longer recognize those countries as actual governments of that area. We should almost immediately take action and establish a democratic regime in its place to save its people from genocide and destruction.
Yes, but one can argue that you have no right going into another country and toppling their government.
Well, not if you don't see them as a legitimate country.
Yeah, but see, that's the tricky part, because then where does it stop? If the U.S., say the U.S. stops recognizing a bunch of sovereignty of countries and invades them, who's to say it stops recognizing sovereignty of its allies?
Because the United States is a constitutional republic that is controlled by its people, not just the president of the time. If, for example, Donald Trump came out tomorrow and says we no longer recognize the government of the United Kingdom, do you not think there would be riots in the streets? Do you not think that there would be impeachment in the House?
No, there would not be riots in the street over the UK. Would there be riots in the UK? Possibly. Would there be?
No, there would be riots in the street.
US and NATO?
That's a massive move against our alliances. That's a massive move against democracy.
He's already distanced himself with several actions from our so-called allies.
But let's keep it civil, all right? Look, the whole point of this "where does it stop" question is that we have to establish a line. And if a country is mass murdering its people and depriving its citizens of their rights to life, liberty, and property, we need to intervene.
Yes, but you see, you can't intervene based on that logic because everyone has different views on that.
Braun, you don't understand. Just because different people, like for example, there are a lot of people out there who don't believe. For example, there's a very common belief. If you've ever heard of this memory TV thing, one of the very common viewpoints on there is that Jews are not really people. You can't take one of these popular beliefs. You can't just take other people's beliefs into account. If the majority of the country does agree with these morals and we say, hey, we need to intervene because that's a horrible thing. We need to intervene because that's a horrible thing, Braun. We can't just take the account of the views of other people in other countries.
The U.S. is trampling on their beliefs then, Dan. If the U.S. forcefully intervenes in the government's politics...
And why is that bad?
Okay, number one...
Why is that bad?
You can't say, oh, hey, we should make them democratic if they don't want to be democratic. You're going to face more resistance from the inside than the own fucking government did.
And so what?
Well, there's this...
So American soldiers should lose their lives because you feel like taking down a dictatorship? Yeah, no thanks.
No, because here's the thing, Braun. There is a decent minority in almost every single country which wants to have freedom. In fact, democracy does need a minimum IQ requirement to actually function correctly. But overall, if you do establish a democratic regime over the course of decades, you can better educate the people and better indoctrinate new generations to believe in democracy.
Yes, but how many people are going to lose their lives in those decades due to rebel groups or resistance fighters?
Well, I do not know how many people are going to lose their lives, but guess what, Braun? It is justified, and it is important that this takes place.
It's not justified to invade a country simply because you don't like what's going on there.
Than live in a dictatorship. Yes, it is justified. When you see things such as genocide, you cannot, on a good conscience, say that we do not need to intervene. When a country...
Yes, but when doing that, you have to fucking also think about how many people are going to lose their lives in a war that you have no point in starting in the first place.
There is a point in starting in. We just talked about that. So I do have a point, and here's the thing. It does not matter how many people lose their lives. The whole point
you're here to hear that first, folks.
Human beings have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and property, and if those rights are taken away, there's no point in living.
Okay,
That is
that's
the
a
purpose of life.
philosophical belief. First
That
off,
is a philosophical belief. I think that the United
there's
States,
many
I
philosophies.
think that our diplomacy and our foreign policy should be governed in a large part by morals. This is a common belief by Woodrow Wilson, and it's just about the only thing I believe with him about it. I think that we need to govern our foreign policy more closer to the morals that we have. And when we see a horrible government like Myanmar, which can't even stand up to our military, has no protection from other nations, and has slaughtered 300,000 people in 2 years, what's saying we can't go in and liberate this horrible dictatorship, which, by the way, was actually a democracy until 2002. There's actually a large part of the people in there that do want a democracy. And here's when it stops, Braun. It stops when we've gotten rid of all these horrible dictatorships that are creating genocide. I think a pretty good model of when it stops is when there's no more genocide.
Oh my God. But then there are always going to be people that go against the norm. That will never change because human beings are also confrontational by nature.
Yes, you're right, Braun, but why have this pessimistic viewpoint? Why not try?
Because
There's always a balance of powers. Can I finish my point? Can I finish my point? There's a very good balance of powers argument to be made. The idea that whenever the good becomes stronger, the bad also becomes stronger. This happened in Europe for hundreds of years. It's portrayed in philosophy by almost every single popular movie. As one side gets stronger, the other side must rise to take its place. That's why, in reality, we have a cycle about every 100 to 200 years or so where there's a massive war over good and bad, good and evil, stuff like that. But the whole point is, Braun, is that it's better to try than to sit back and be irresponsible and immoral and allow people to be brutally murdered and have their rights taken away all over the world.
Okay, Dan, first off, history has proven time and time again human beings are confrontational. We've been confrontational since we first set up like fucking villages in society.
I never said I wanted to make the world perfect, Braun. I said I wanted to try.
You're fighting a losing game. Plenty of countries have tried to make a world a better place.
It's not fighting a losing game though, Braun, because the world is freer, the world is wealthier, and the world is more democratized than ever before. People live very nice lives today, or at least the majority of them do. About half the population has access to the internet.
Women are property.
Stop. All right, sorry about that. That was my little brother.
What did he say? I didn't even hear it.
He said hippity-hoppity, women are property, but that's besides the point. So,
such a dead meme.
But here's the thing, Braun. Society has progressed. People's views now are more liberal than ever. Many people, and when I say liberal, I don't mean like to the American left liberal. I mean classical liberal, which is the same ideology of the Republican Party in the 1920s. But people have views of egalitarianism. Many people are changing, and the world is rapidly changing. More people are becoming more free every single day, and we can speed that process up by making things more democratized. We can make
there's an order to things, Dan. You cannot force it. If you force something, there's a good chance it'll blow up in your face.
Here's the thing, Braun. There is an order to things, and I completely understand that. That's why I'm not arguing for a war with China or Russia. Because here's the reality. If China or Russia was defeated by the United States and we established a democratic regime, it's very likely that the United States government would slowly turn more and more corrupt, facing the idea that there's now no contender to the world's power of the United States. The argument that I'm making is that we can easily stop the mass murder of millions of people by taking out small militaristic regimes that are committing genocide.
I'm just saying, some countries have proven that for those specific countries, democracy just didn't work.
Give me a couple examples.
Okay, China.
That's not been proven in China. In fact, in Taiwan, democracy works very well.
Yeah, and look at how badly communist China wants to I wouldn't say kill, but subjugate.
All right, and what does that matter? China's a horrible regime. Using China as an example that democracy doesn't work, communism doesn't work in China either. They actually had to move to a semi-capitalist standpoint that is basically state-run capitalism.
Because of globalization, that's why, and because of how their geography is.
Because in 1998, China realized that they were incredibly poor. They had to open up, and with the help of Bill Clinton, they were able to establish them getting into the WTO. Of course, they kept their power as a developing power, and they were able to do this, and they basically created state-run capitalism, subjugated American companies into following it, and then completely censored the internet. China is not a good example to use, Braun. They've killed somewhere between 65 and 75 million people. 45 million of those were killed in just 4 years during the Great Leap Forward in the early 60s. That's not a very good model to use.
I could use the Weimar, whatever it was, republic.
The Weimar Republic's not a good example either, because while it didn't work,
democracy.
No, but Braun, you're giving an example of how a democracy doesn't work in a country. Germany's democracy works very well today. And the Weimar Republic's not a good model because they were in the middle of a massive economic downturn, they had massive war debts, and their people were overall demoralized and defeated. As a bonus, there were communist guerrillas left and right. Today, Germany, which is almost the same nation with the same culture and the same people, has now become completely and utterly democratized.
No, there are still people, well, there aren't many of them, but there are still people who believe in the Nazis in Germany.
There are still people who believe in Nazism in Germany, but guess what? Germany is now a functioning democracy with the majority of the public committing to it. So the Weimar Republic is not a good example to use either. Give me another one.
I don't know. I can't name specific countries in South America, but I do know there were countries in South America that had democracies that changed over the years.
You could use Venezuela as an example.
Venezuela used to be a democracy. That's right.
They are still a democracy. It's a democracy that's elected a socialist government.
Than they are a democracy now.
They're a democracy that's elected a socialist government, and now that the socialist government's been elected, the people are now oppressed, starving, and dying of disease because the socialist government continues to rig elections. The people tried out a socialist government, the socialist government seized power, and when the people tried to get rid of the socialist government, Hugo Chavez is his name. He basically...
Yeah, the Hugo diet or whatever it's called, the Chavez diet.
Hugo Chavez took a ton of land from all of his political rivals and opponents. He took almost all of their money, and then he redistributed it among the people. But that did not work out very well. Now, the Venezuelan bolivar is worth less than World of Warcraft currency.
I would never know. I never played World of Warcraft.
Instead of bread lines, they have lines for dumpsters. I haven't played World of Warcraft either. It's just an interesting statistic. Instead of having lines for bread, which have also proven to not work, they have lines to the dumpster. They are literally eating garbage, and they are eating their own domesticated animals, such as cats. Most of them are starving and are dying of disease all across the country. I don't want to interrupt you,
but I do want Curtis's opinion. He's been very quiet.
He has not talked very much lately.
Curtis, do you have an opinion on anything we've said?
Sorry, I was eating.
Did you even hear what we've been saying?
Yeah, I did, but...
Do you have an opinion on it?
I missed part of it, but what was the general topic of it? Because I heard a lot.
Basically, intervening in other countries, basically.
And establishing democratic governments. Braun's trying to say that democracy doesn't really work for every country.
I think we should not bother with other countries, but I do think democracy is the...
I'm saying that I don't think it's our right to basically go in and forcefully change a country's government.
And my point is that I do believe that it is our right, and I think it's not our right, it's our responsibility. It's the most powerful country on the world who just happens to be one of the freest countries on the planet. We have a responsibility.
But then America's going to look like
others. No, we're not looking like a bully. We're rising other nations up to our level. People's lives are improving because of us. The United States Army is a liberating army. When we marched through the streets of Bafa in Syria recently. It's not Bafa, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry. There were Syrians...
Something like that?
There were Syrians all over the place cheering our names because we set the United States military in and we got rid of ISIS, which is a horrible authoritarian regime. Just like many. There's really not that many differences between ISIS and Myanmar. The only difference is that ISIS had to use more radical tactics because they didn't already have an established state to take over. They wanted to start a new one.
Oh, by the way, Dan, completely unrelated, but you remember how you played with Brent and a couple other guys as ISIS in Hoi 4 and Millennium Dawn, right?
Yeah.
Brent said it was your fault that they lost.
It wasn't. He has no idea what he's doing. It was awful. I'm the only one who's made it to the second coalition. But that's besides the point. We're still live streaming a political debate, so let's...
Yeah, I know, but the main person who's hosting the live stream isn't even really talking.
Well, I've been eating, and I just...
I mean, it is your live stream, so you probably should say something for your watchers, you know?
Yeah.
Alright, so I mean, Bron, give me some other examples. What are some other countries where democracy just doesn't
this shit back when I fucking like religiously looked up history, but I don't really do that anymore. It's been a while.
And I mean, Bron, I will say there is merit to your argument on a temporary basis because it's been established that the minimum average IQ needed to make a functioning democracy without any foreign intervention is 93. But the thing is that if we did take over the government and we made a democratic regime and basically toppled the previous authoritarian regime over generations and generations, that IQ would eventually rise with increased education funding, and eventually the people would be willing to vote in a functioning democracy as more people were.
I'm just saying, whenever we go in and forcefully change a government, there's always problems.
Yeah, it's because we never take the time to actually properly...
Yeah, we go in, we topple their government, and we're like, okay, now we'll see you later.
Well, yeah, so that's the issue, Bron. Like, for example, in Iraq, I was talking to Curtis about this earlier.
Yeah.
Street stops and crimes and all kinds of terrorist attacks in Iraq had risen all the way down. They had declined by 8 times. They were actually 10% of what they were in 2002. And that was before we even invaded Iraq. We had completely, almost absolutely pacified Iraq. And then we decided to pull out. We had actually succeeded in making a democratic working regime, and in maybe a decade or two, we actually would have been able to pull out. But because we did pull out, the Iraqi police force, which we armed very well, just did not have the morale to fight. They didn't have the training to fight, and they easily lost to ISIS and actually fled and gave ISIS a ton of equipment in the process.
Didn't ISIS like have APCs at one point?
Well, yes, because we sold a ton of them to the Iraqi regime. The Iraqi army did not have the will to fight and abandoned them and fled, and then ISIS captured them.
Like, people are like, oh, where did ISIS get its APCs from? I'm like, maybe from the country it beat. Well, I mean, they didn't. I don't think they fully beat in Iraq. I'm pretty sure there's still fighting going on there.
Oh, of course.
Last I heard, at least. I know, like, who is it? The Kurds or whatever are fighting against ISIS still, I'm pretty sure.
Yes, it's, of course. So basically, the Kurds are, they're a state that's partly controlled by us. We have a lot of influence over them. We have a lot of troops there. We sell them tons of weapons.
Yeah, it's Kurdistan, right?
Kurdistan at the moment. And Kurdistan is kind of an issue because they're fighting the Syrian government, they're fighting the Iraqi government, and they're fighting the Turkish government all at the same time. And recently, the Free Syrian Army actually turned on well, not recently, it was about 8 months ago, the Free Syrian Army actually turned on the Kurdistanis. I don't know what the actual term for them are.
I think it is actually Kurdistanis.
Oh, it's the Kurds. It's the Kurds. That's what it is.
That's what.
They turned on the Kurds and allied themselves with the Turkish because Turkey is basically, they've almost completely controlled the entire northern state of Syria. And with help
Hold up. I don't want to interrupt you, but Curtis, Brent would like to be unmuted. You don't have to. He would just like to be unmuted.
Well, all right. They've opened the floodgates.
He wants to add to the conversation.
What's up?
So, I'm going to finish my point real quick. So, basically, Turkey invaded with about 16,000 troops, and then the Free Syrian Army, they contributed with as many troops as they could, and they basically completely taken over the northern state of Afrin. They claim it's for security reasons, but in all reality, Turkey weakened the Kurds because they see the Kurds as an uprising against the banned KDP, which is the Kurdistani Workers' Party. I know the initials don't match up because it translates to Turkish, but basically, Turkey sees the Kurdistani revolts as a rise up against that. and they do not want the Kurdistanis, or the Kurds, sorry, I keep saying that, rising up in southern Turkey.
Mm.
Oh, the PKK as well.
I'm just saying, I understand where you're coming from, but you kind of understand where I'm coming from. I don't think we should.
I do understand where you're coming from.
Because then if a government has that power, it can easily corrupt itself with it.
It can corrupt itself, and that's the reason why I think that we should really only use our power on small authoritarian governments that have almost no effect. Because the issue is, what happens when, you know, the United States has all this power, generations go by, and then it starts becoming corrupted. And that's what's happened with many governments in the past. The Roman Republic is one I would by far name. After Julius Caesar established himself as the emperor, about 50 years later, Rome hit its peak and then slowly declined because there were no longer...
The dictator,
yes, the dictator. And then after that, Augustus Caesar made himself the first emperor. But basically, Rome slowly declined over hundreds of years as its institutions died. For example, one of the things that the Roman Republic used to do to incentivize people to increase technology, and do you guys know what's the term? Creative destruction. You guys know what that is, right?
But yeah, I've heard of it.
The idea that, you know, the old needs to die for the new to come in, and it's a constant cycle in capitalism.
You mean like Japan? It happened too, I would say.
Like, for example, the printing press basically got rid of all scribe jobs.
Japan, with like the samurai and what followed after them.
For example, that's one of the reasons why the Ottoman Empire was so behind technologically. They didn't allow for creative destruction because when the printing press actually didn't even introduce itself in the Ottoman Empire until 1821. And basically, their argument was that it would take so many people out of the job because they were a lot of people were scribes at the time. So this whole idea happened with the Roman Empire. One day, this guy came in to Rome, and I don't remember which emperor he was talking to. This is a well-known story. And he said, I have a way to move these pillars with a water system. That way we won't need 6 to 8 men carrying these pillars everywhere. And the emperor said, have you told anybody about this? And the guy said, no, I've been waiting for you because I'm pretty sure you're going to reward me with a ton of money. But in fact, the emperor did the opposite. He beheaded the guy and hid the plans and completely destroyed them because his argument was that it would put so many workers out of their jobs lurking pillars around. You know?
See, the problem, you mentioned how the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire. The problem with those types of governments is how well the government does is all dependent on the emperor or his child afterwards.
And that's another reason why Rome fell. They didn't have any incentivizations anymore because, think about it, right? The Roman Republic is around. You can make as much commerce as you want. You should do as much business as you want because as long as the Roman Republic is around, the people are going to elect the representatives who control the entire republic. And that means that they're not just going to go around confiscating people's wealth and enslaving them. But once the Roman emperor came around, his word is law. He can do anything he wants. If the emperor wants you dead, he wants you dead. So what's the incentive in starting a massive business if you know that the emperor can just roll up and take it all away from you whenever he wants? And that's the simple answer. People just stopped. They stopped working as hard. They stopped creating new technology. The Roman army didn't change past 110 AD all the way to about 400 AD. The Roman army barely changed at all, besides the fact that all the skilled soldiers died.
You want to talk about the Roman army? Another problem with the Roman army was that it was just too spread out.
Yeah, overextension was also a big problem in the Roman Empire. But overall, I'm saying the main cause of it was its turn into an empire.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. But as I said, the problem with empires is that whether the government is good or not is all dependent on who's leading the government.
Yes, and the issue is, these often get passed on to whoever's leading the government's heir or son.
Yeah,
and that
they
means,
can suck sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So the incentives to, you know...
You should know all about sucky air, shouldn't you, Dan?
Alright, stop making references in a live stream that people aren't going to understand.
Hey, YouTubers do it all the time.
Well, yeah, but then they typically explain them. Alright.
Okay, you want me to explain it? EU4 there.
EU4, I have really bad luck, and I always get horrible errors.
There you go. Now people understand.
Every single one of them died at age 15. It really sucks.
No, I thought it was age 20.
It's something like that.
Yeah, but see, look, like I said, you can get really good leaders, but then their children can just suck ass.
You should try playing Crusader Kings too. Then that's
Yeah, Mira fucking lost his rulers really young.
I was playing Crusader Kings 2 with Mira. His leader died, and then he like.
Wait, were you playing with us? Those several games where his leader died immediately? Maybe.
No, I played with him. I introduced him to the game with Inverted.
Oh, yeah, no, he had shitty RNG.
I think this is. Would you guys say this is a pretty good place to end the debate? I think we covered a lot of stuff.
But we've got 4 viewers. So they obviously something's interesting here.
I see.
But how many viewers? How many of those viewers is actually us in the chat?
One of them is me.
I'm one of them.
Are you just
So half of them are people here.
I don't actually know. Hold on.
Well, Brent said people were leaving because you were too quiet or something.
But that was a while ago.
Yeah. That was like a half an hour ago. Ooh.
You don't go do a live stream and then not say anything, Chris.
That was before I stopped saying things because I had to eat.
So wait, where's your channel again in this Discord? Where is it? How do I get to it?
One of the videos in general, and you should.
You're probably just too quiet. Like, you sound really quiet to me when you talk, Curtis.
Yeah, Curtis, you are way too quiet. I have you up on 200, and it sounds like
I do
whispering.
too, and he sounds like he's mumbling half the time.
Well, my mic is being trashed right now, and I am kind of like slightly mumbling in real life too.
So what you're gonna do is you're gonna click the user settings. You're gonna go down to voice and video, and then you're gonna put your output volume to 200.
It's already at 200.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh, I feel kind of bad now of what I just did.
What do you do?
I completely wiped out another empire. Whoops.
What game?
Stellar.
What game were you guys talking about earlier?
Well, earlier we were talking about EU4.
What's the audio subsystem?
To subwoofer us?
No, subsystem. What's the audio subsystem? It says standard.
Wait, are we still live?
Yeah, we're still live.
Yeah, I would assume so. He didn't say we weren't live anymore, so.
Yo, anyways, speaking of like modern dictatorships,
Yeah,
the
you're
Mexican
still alive.
mafia or the cartel literally turn their victims into stew by putting them in
I don't know if you could
hydrofluoric
consider
acid.
the cartel a dictatorship. They're more like
We are
With the amount of members they have and
I think they're more like an oligarchy where there are like multiple people in power.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the Mexican cartel does have a lot of their power because the government is so corrupt in Mexico. I mean, if you look at what happened to Italy post-World War II, the Italian mafia still has power today, but its power over the government and people around it in Italy especially has almost been completely destroyed.
Yeah, but one could argue that the reason why it's so...
When a mafia fights a moral democracy where it's... Excellent new channels. Where there's something worth fighting for, there's really... Most of the people will choose the loyal democracy over the horrible, corrupt dictatorship that is the mafia, because there is a great guarantee that the democratic government will not kill you in your sleep if you wrong them.
Depends.
I mean,
I'm still trying to figure out how we haven't made the cartel a terrorist organization, or have we?
I think it's because I think it's been debated like quite a bit, like whether they should be classified as terrorists or not.
Yeah, well, they don't.
Because like,
they don't really go
when we classify them as terrorists, we can actually do
by the
more
definition,
stuff.
terrorism is any organization that uses terror tactics to get what it wants. So technically, the cartel would fit under that.
Yeah, kind of.
But then, like, the problem is when you start classifying the cartel as a terrorist thing, what else do you classify as terrorist?
We'd have to end up classifying half of the gangs in America as terrorists, too.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Well, Antifa's considered a terrorist organization, yet we don't do
What? Did you say that again? What's considered terrorist?
Antifa.
Who? Say again?
Antifa.
Do you hear what he's saying? Anyone else? Can you like say it louder for me?
Antifa. The anti-fascist.
Antifa. I'm not sure who those are.
The Anti-Federation.
No, anti-fascist.
Yeah, it's anti-fascist.
Man,
Oh,
I'm looking at the chat right now. Nick Sporn is not a big fan of me.
They're a bunch of
Dan, what's that guy?
Well, what does he have a problem with? The whole intervening?
He must have a very bad opinion of the United States. He does not believe that we are one of the freest countries. He cites the incarceration rate, and then he thinks that the EU should actually invade us.
Dan, look at Stephen S. Look at
Okay,
look at what
but
he
one
said
could
about
argue
you.
that the EU's government is more inefficient than the American government is sometimes.
And that's because the EU is a super state with many different cultures and regions
And the problem
religions.
is that the EU, as far as I know, only caters to like the really big ones in it, the countries.
Well, here's the issue. Almost all of the EU politicians are actually unelected bureaucrats, which don't stand for the people, and the EU is not as homogenous as the United States is. The United States is almost entirely homogenous in terms of culture, not race, but definitely culture and geography, whereas the EU is many different countries made up of many different cultures, you know, it made up of many different religions, in which the United States is by far majority Protestant. And the thing is,
the United States is actually less than 50% Protestant now.
And the thing, well, that's you're gonna have to cite that source.
Dan, you can, and the United States is far majority Christian. I mean, it's a large percentage Catholic now, but it's...
The Pew Research Center from 2012 says 61% Protestant, 79% Christian.
That's 2012, that's 6 years ago. I'll look up a more recent one. But...
Oh, definitely. Jojo 20, I think direct democracy is horrible, in my opinion.
You didn't like when you learned about it with Athens?
Well, here's the thing. Direct democracy can work in very small city-state groups like Athens, but that does not mean it's moral. So, no. Catholics are Christians. Catholics are Christians.
That is actually true, because if you know your stuff about Athens, only wealthy landowners could actually vote, like actual Athenian citizens, and they had to live in Athens for that. And they had to be landowners.
Here's the thing about a direct democracy that I have a problem with, is that if there was a direct democracy, the first thing that would be completely void is the Constitution, because the idea of a direct democracy is that whatever the people vote on and decide is what happens. So if there are 100 people and they are living in a government, this is just an example, if 51 of the people vote to rape and murder the other 49 under the current government, that is actually what they have to do. That's what has to happen. Whereas a constitutional republic like the United States has constitutional rights and the right to life, liberty, and property, which means that you can't just vote to, take all of Bill Gates' money and distribute it equally to the people. You can't just...
I'm pretty sure the Swiss are a mix of both the direct democracy.
The Swiss are a mix of both, and the Swiss government is one of the few exceptions. I think that the Swiss government does a really great job on a lot of things, but I think some other stuff like euthanasia is a very big problem.
Yeah, euthanasia is disgusting.
Abortionist, yeah.
Are you about to cite Norway to JoJo 20?
Norway is not a...
Norway is a big exception, and they're actually not a direct democracy. They do have a constitution, if that's what you were about to cite.
They're actually very socialist, to be honest.
Well, here's the thing. Norway is socialist because their population is currently around 6.2 million people. And... Wait, hold on.
By the way, do I have any haters?
No, not at the moment. So, here's the thing. Oh, Switzerland. Oh, I see. All right, well, so the thing is with Norway is that Norway's population, they're actually, they're not socialist. Nick Spawn is right. They're not actually a socialist. They're a social democracy.
Okay.
They no, and he's right, because the thing is, a lot of people, they look at quote unquote socialist countries like Canada, and they say socialism might work because look at how well Canada's doing. Canada's not a socialist country; they're a democracy with a socialist healthcare system. They have socialist aspects.
Communist China is it's communist, but it has democratic aspects in it.
Saying that these countries like Norway, Denmark, and Sweden are socialist is very horrible. And
it's a very general categorization.
I'm gonna say this. So democracy is your ice cream, all right? And the touch
to a socialist country. They're not actually a socialist country, but they're pretty dang close to it. And the reason why is because Norway has a population of 5.1 million. Almost all those people live off oil reserves and subsidies. If you actually put them in the United States, they're doing actually significantly less off economically than Norwegian immigrants to the United States. Sorry?
Hey,
yeah.
So basically, well, let's put democracy as an ice cream, okay? So you can have and there's plenty of options of toppings to go with your ice cream, all right? So let's say socialism is like black licorice. You can pour it on. Some people will like it, but a lot of people won't. And like I'm not talking about socialism. I'm talking about like socialist aspects. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So basically, Norway is just a bunch of people that like black licorice sprinkles on their ice cream.
so I mean, but Norway is decently close to a socialist government because they have an incredibly homogenous population, an incredibly homogenous culture. They all live in basically the same aspect. They get tons of subsidies from oil, which is why they're able to support themselves so easily. And we've basically been paying for their mutual defense for the last 3 decades.
Yeah.
But they don't even have to worry about stuff like a defense budget because we basically back them up on that.
I mean, they still have to meet NATO minimums.
And I mean, Denmark actually did the same thing. Denmark actually elected a socialist party about a decade ago, and 3 years ago, they actually declared bankruptcy and have now elected a reactionary government into power. And that's why people don't really cite Denmark as a socialist paradise anymore, although they used to.
Well, they don't cite Sweden as a socialist paradise anymore. I mean, some do, but there's no-go zones in Sweden where the police can't work, and it's just the big oof.
Well, that's the thing. Sweden used to be quite the paradise because their population was homogenous. The thing is, when it comes to a government like a socialist government, where the government now has the right to take people's property and stuff like that and confiscate things like you see in Venezuela. When the population is homogenous and they're all in agreement about things, it can sometimes work. But when you look at Sweden today, it's overloaded with immigrants, which would not be a bad thing, except for the fact that their entire government system relies on them all being in agreement and having a very similar culture. So there's a ton of culture clash in Sweden, and you see that, going out in their crime statistics right now.
Didn't the stream end?
No.
I don't think it did.
We're still going, and we're going till people have nothing to talk about.
Venezuela is officially a socialist government. A lot of the property of wealthy landowners who are opponents to Hugo Chavez back in the 90s, all of their property and their wealth was taken by Maduro. Maduro regularly oppresses its people, and the elections are regularly rigged. Venezuela is more socialist than democratic. It was a democratic government, which in the 80s, they elected a socialist party, but then that socialist party seized power and has rigged almost every election since.
They basically wanted to see how it would turn out, and they did not like what they got.
Socialism can be democratic if they elect a socialist government, but when the socialist government begins to rig elections and take people's land and all their private property, it's no longer democratic.
Well,
I'm sorry, Nick Sporn.
Social Democrat, like the ideology of the Social Democrats does semi-work, but their immigration policies are terrible.
It's honestly the same thing with the ideology of communism. Ideology of communism sounds great, but when actually put into practice, it's a piece of shit.
Well, there's social democracy and then there's democratic socialism. And you know what the funniest part about Bernie Sanders is he mislabels himself. It's hilarious. He says he's democratic socialist, but he's really a social democrat.
So here's the thing: when a lot of people think of socialism, they are still thinking of stuff like socialist healthcare in Canada, but they forget that when you look at things like the Soviet Union and communist China, they're not actually communist governments because communism is an economic system. They are socialist governments. The idea of a socialist government is a government that has full control over people's lives and what they do. Socialism is not in itself democratic.
Well, neither would be the ideal communism, but the ideal You see, communism wasn't even supposed to be the way it is. It was supposed to be even more democratic than like it really was, because the people were supposed to be, or like the Soviets were supposed to be elected worker councilmen. So they were supposed to be elected people by
Nick Sporn, I don't know what you're trying to say. Communism is an economic system. Socialism is a governmental system. That's Wikipedia is not an accurate source either.
Well, you see, communism and socialism in general were supposed to be more just like the workers.
Wikipedia can be an accurate source at times, although it has a quite large liberal bias.
Well, the problem with Wikipedia is that people can change it whenever they feel like.
That's not how it works.
It's reviewed way more than it used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, like things are checked all the time, and it has to be any edit has to be approved by a moderator before it actually takes effect.
It's very true. I remember there was a joke a long time ago, back in 2013, where some guy would get drunk, and every single time he would get like really wasted, he would just make Missouri slightly bigger on the map of the United States in the Wikipedia.
Would make who?
And they got to the point where Missouri was engulfing like half of Illinois before everybody figured it out and then changed it back.
No, well, what's it called? Yeah, but the Soviet Union was supposed to be really dumb. Like, it was supposed to be really kind of democratic in its functions, but then Stalin took over and kind of...
Yeah, Stalin took over.
Yeah, but
Yep, good old Stalin the prick.
But if Trotsky would have taken over, of course there would still been social reforms and like millions of people would have died. But they would have...
Stalin was a paranoid motherfucker.
Yeah, but even when Trotsky took over, there still would have been a lot of people that died because of...
Oh yeah, there still would have been mass murders, starvation, and stuff like that.
Yeah, but you see...
There may have been less, but there definitely still would have been some.
There still would have been, but then in that case, if Trotsky took over, there'd be the Soviet, like the Soviets would actually be a thing. Like the Soviet Union was supposed to be a union of Soviets. So it was like, because the Soviet was like a guy who got elected to represent a certain district.
So, for example,
that was the entire idea behind the
Yeah.
Soviet Union, and it got ruined by one crazy man.
So, for example,
That's
about
all it
2 or
takes
3 years
sometimes.
ago, I read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, and there's some interesting things that he says in there, and he mainly talks about the communist aspect of it, but towards the end he starts talking about the governmental forms of socialism, for example. So his idea of communism is actually not too warped. His communist idea is basically, it's like democracy, but for business. The idea that the workers should control the business, which, while itself defies the rights of the people who started the business, at the same time, it basically makes the idea that every single person who works for the company should act like a shareholder, and he believes that that will make workers have a vested interest in the company and its success, and that will entice them to work harder.
Yeah, well, communism wasn't that bad of an idea until it was ruined by evil people.
I mean, Karl Marx, don't get me wrong, he has a lot of really dumb ideas in there. Like, for example, he thinks that he actually completely defies the idea of a profit motive in currency. He doesn't even believe in currency. He actually says that there should be a bartering system in place, which is incredibly inefficient.
There's a bit of an issue with that, because then you don't have the business, so what will the workers rule if there's no currency?
Well, his idea is basically that, so that's where the government comes in. His idea is that the government should regulate deals on how businesses cooperate with each other. So his whole idea is that the workers will vote for what the company does. The company will make deals through the government with other companies, and they will all supply each other with stuff. That's basically his whole idea. And at the very end,
it works in retrospect until you kind of like look deeply into it and think about it, and then it immediately gets shut down and dies.
And then we get what socialist government forms are, which is where the government, the definition of socialism is where the government controls the means of production. They control all economic power within a country, and they control all of the people's power within a country. So what you get nowadays is a government where a socialist government, where the government can do basically whatever it wants. It pretends to also like private business, but whenever those private businesses do anything that the government disagrees with, they just confiscate all of the wealth of the business and they arrest all the people. For example, with a lot of companies that have been recently leaving Venezuela, Venezuela will nationalize the industry there right before it happens.
I don't get like the guy in chat is talking about market socialism.
He doesn't realize that market socialism is completely different from socialism. Market socialism is a lighter version of communism.
It's market socialism is the control of trade and businesses by the government.
Yes, it's exactly what socialism is.
They still have some freedom. but
it's a lot closer to what fascists did under the government, where they would have private companies that they basically made state-controlled, that agreed with the government, and they would entice them to make things like guns.
Well, yeah, market socialism is definitely not the same as regular societal socialism, or whatever you want to call it. There's definitely a big difference there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this guy in chat's kind of just going in a circle. I literally just talked about reading a book I just talked about reading the entire Communist Manifesto.
Yeah, I mean, communism is pretty screwed up in many ways.
Well, socialism was an ideology far before Karl Marx's.
Socialism's also just doesn't work is the problem.
Yeah, well, it doesn't work because of how it's used.
It doesn't work because of how it's executed, Brent.
No, but socialism can never work.
Yeah,
it's just human nature.
Human nature doesn't allow socialism and communism to work.
Yeah.
Nicksporn, if you've read the Communist Manifesto, you should know that the first about 600 pages talk about the economics of communism, and then the last 150 or so talk about what the government's role in that economy and how it should regulate everything and actually control the companies. Marx was pro-democracy. His entire belief was that a democratic government would eventually rise up to meet the capitalist system. But socialism is where the government instead takes over the companies and then allows the people to choose what each business does, because all businesses become part of the government.
That is true socialism, but not the socialism that's been executed in real life. They don't allow the people to do anything in real socialism.
So the whole point was that the government would control Marx's entire point. So modern socialism is different from Marx's socialism because in Marx's socialism, the workers would control the means of production, and what they would basically do is the workers would have a vested interest in each of these different companies. But they weren't really companies, they were businesses for different products, and the government would regulate how those products were shipped out and completely control them. But because under Marx's theory, it would be a democracy, the workers would specifically control how stuff was made and shipped, and then the rest of the people would also control how these different factories would ship things out to the economy.
I love how I give a roll to Brent those neocon, and it moved him up in the chat and like reorganized him in the chat.
I'm sorry, what?
No, I'm talking about the voice chat. You were below me in the voice chat until I gave you a roll, and then it just moved you up, and I was like, "But the roll's less than mine."
I would still like an interventionist role. Very big fan.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but there's always at least one issue with the socialism.
But dude, if you mind, do not give me the neoconservative role. I don't consider myself that. That's a yucky. That's like Bush.
So,
I consider myself like more than that. If you.
Well, I'm not gonna consider you more than neocon because that's the new conservatives.
Yeah, but I'm not a neocon. Those are like the wimpy conservatives.
Okay, sure. I'll move you after we're done. But does anybody else have anything to add or want to?
Not really.
It depends, actually. What would your definition of neoconservative be? Your definition.
Well, mine is like the pro-Trumpers and like the Tea Party.
Oh, if it's a pro-Trump, then yeah, I could consider myself that. It's just that the definition used for that is widely like people who are like pro-Bush and like conservative millennials and other people who are more socially liberal than traditional conservatives.
I don't really consider them that.
At least that I've interpreted, but I mean everyone has a different interpretation of it.
Yeah, well, I'm a nationalistic libertarian, so.
One thing that would be I'm sorry. One thing that would be interesting would be if we play like a Millennium Dawn Hearts of Iron 4 game while talking about this, and almost like simulated the real world politics of this.
That would be impossible because I would just go pro-Republican America.
Not well, you could, and then you could do Donald Trump. That would be cool, and like you could. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
I suppose.
Man, this kind of screws me over. You guys have invited the other people in. I want to stay really bad, but I was about to go out to dinner soon.
Also, I did advertise this live stream.
Yeah, I already saw Brent.
Well, you want to know what, actually? Since these new people are coming in, they could just take the place of, like, me and Trashy. So that you guys can keep the debate going.
You know Trashy's left a while.
Oh, yeah, I know. I know he's left a while ago, but still. I want to find... I'm trying to find my political compass so I can post it right now. So that might help.
Dan, did you see my political compass?
Put it in side chat.
I'm trying to find it right now, though.
Wait, Dan, did you see my political compass?
I'm all the way to slightly down. That's basically my political compass. So
I don't know if JoJo has some like.
I'm a little bit more of a libertarian than a conservative. You know, all about that freedom. Oh, here it is. Found it.
Curtis, I noticed that you spelled schedules with a Q, even though it has a CH, but whatever.
What?
I noticed that in the text title for the text channels, you spelled schedules with a Q.
Do you spell it? I thought schedules was spelled with a Q.
No, it has a CH instead, and there's no U before the ED.
I don't know. Can somebody look that up for me? I don't. I thought it was like that.
I just did. That's why.
Oh, okay. Dan the Man 14 has joined. Why? Wait.
I have to.
Did you rejoin or what? Or is that your second?
I put my other account in so I can. Here, it's in the general chat. It's my political spectrum graph.
Noise.
Wait, Dan, are you still looking at that?
Am I still looking at what?
Look in the general.
Greetings.
Well, hello there, Jojo.
Who that?
This is Jojo.
Guy, so it was in the chat.
Dan.
Hey, Jojo.
Dan. Oh, hey, what's up?
So
hello.
What is your political affiliation, Jojo? Just so we know.
Left center, I'd say.
Are you Nick
Left
Sporn?
center?
Are you Nick Sporn or are you Jojo? Okay. I see you now.
Jojo, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, we will welcome everybody to this chat. I have another chat for just more right-wing stuff, but...
Anyway, Jojo's coming in. I hope you can take my place. I'm gonna...
Dan, when are you gonna be back?
Oh man, I'll probably be back in like a little while, but
like, how long is a little while?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, just I did really enjoy this debate.
Yeah.
I'm not as good of a debater on the PC. I like to be in much more person. I stutter a lot on the internet.
Jojo, what's your opinion on the banning of Alex Jones?
See you guys later.
That was what it originally was about until, you know.
Excuse me, the banning of Alex Jones's. I haven't heard of that actually. Right.
Yeah, he got banned off like all social media things and also almost all social media platforms in one day. Like literally, like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube.
Is there any specific reason for that?
I mean, Facebook had a reason, but I don't know. I think the other one's just bent to left, like far left pressure. Because he was a nut job, yes, and he was a conservative, but he still has the right to speak. You know what I mean? At least in.
Yeah, obviously it's still free speech, but to be fair, it's still the company's decision. If they want to ban a member, they have that in their terms of use. So.
Yeah, but it's kind of concerning that they all simultaneously banned him at once, though. That's the biggest concern.
Obviously, that's
yeah, it's like, where does it
that's
stop?
something.
So, like well, for all we know, they could ban Fox News off of YouTube. This and Fox News, for at least for me, I consider them very center right. I mean, they're conspiracy theories, and some of the anchors are.
To be fair, where most news platforms, at least are not like totally biased, you will always find at least one or two people
Inside.
that actually like have a more logic point of view and won't just immediately try to bias their opinion somewhere.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you know about American news stations, but especially NBC is very, and like Washington Post, they're very.
Yeah, you hear a lot. You hear
They're
a
very,
lot.
they're very leftist biased.
Mm.
But mostly just so they can get clicks and views, but they still have their agendas.
Yeah.
Everyone has their agenda.
That's true, sadly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if your job's to present the news, you should just present the news. In my opinion.
Well, there's a little problem with that. Is that how they make money? Obviously, right now they make more money the more people look. So the more clickbaity, the more something confirms your own political debate, or not debate, like your own political agenda. And the more people there are that have that agenda, the more money you're going to get.
Yeah.
So
That's
unless
obviously true, but
that's obviously true, and now the logical following of that is that the moment the people decides to actually spend money regularly, like with a monthly subscription or something like that, that's the moment when it switches back to just normal news, when reporters can actually report fairly and what they want without having to do clickbaity articles.
less advertised based.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Well, even with advertising space, it wouldn't matter too much, because if you're able to support yourself by monthly or yearly contributions, you don't have to worry that much about getting enough clicks or getting enough views.
Yeah, but we devolved into interventionalism, and whether Dan and Brown were arguing. The guy that left was Dan, and Brown's still here. He's just not.
Braun, what server are you on for Postscriptum?
Well, I'm Postscriptum right now.
What are you playing? Oh, Solaris.
Hmm.
I thought you were on Postscriptum for some reason.
No, I'm murdering primitives.
No,
Why am I murdering primitives? Free planet.
No, but I think we did have a good debate today. I mean, when we still are kind of. I don't know.
I wasn't there for most of it, but it seemed quite civilized with a lot of arguments. So.
Well, it's always good to have arguments. It improves.
Yeah, everyone can appreciate a good debate.
Yeah, if you don't have debate, then you therefore just.
You don't need democracy if you don't need debate. Yeah.
If you don't have a debate, you don't have a democracy.
Yeah.
You can argue with yourself.
Yeah.
Well, you can always argue with yourself, but
you're the only thing you're gonna do is change your own vote at that point. It's always nice when people's opinions.
So you guys are all from the U.S. or?
Unless I think Brent's obviously on. It's good. I think Brent's
I'm what?
I think Brent might be from a different planet though.
A different planet? No, I'm from New York.
I might as well be from a different planet.
Yeah, but he's obviously from a different planet of some sort.
He's obviously an alien.
Why is that?
Probably an illegal alien as well.
Back on.
Damn it, man! I don't have enough of this shit.
You guys have talked about healthcare, right? And just overall, like,
Maybe not in this debate, but I think we've done it in the past.
Yeah, I believe so.
Oof. Yeah, I think everybody's piecing out, so I might end it for tonight.
Mhm.
Well, you can always join us anytime, though.